you and Congressman Massey have co-sponsored, which is the Epstein Files Transparency Act 2. A shame that you all needed a sequel to the original legislation that was supposed to get everything out into the open. I'm curious what you made of the performance yesterday, first, of acting Attorney General Todd Blanche, who wants to become the Attorney General. His saying, yes, we made some mistakes, but it was such a long process of millions and millions of documents that we did make some errors. We did have some redactions that we should have made, some that we shouldn't have made. Are you satisfied with his performance, and what does your legislation do to get what so many Americans, Republicans and Democrats alike, want, which is to get all this out into the open?
No, he's been the biggest obstacle to transparency and justice for the survivors. I mean, he still hasn't released 3 million documents. Most of the documents he hasn't released have the names where survivors have identified in the F-302 forms the men who abused or trafficked them. He still, shockingly, hasn't met with the survivors, and I don't understand any logic of why he wouldn't meet with survivors with their lawyers. It makes no sense. Had he met with survivors, they would not have released names of survivors like they did. Our legislation that we drafted basically allows the state attorney generals to start to prosecute some of these men who abused or raped these young girls. There hasn't been a single investigation or prosecution in the United States. There have been prosecutions all over the world, but not here. This will allow them to do that. There's one line on Thomas, because Thomas was one of the very few Republicans who had the guts to say that Joe Biden legitimately won. And if you want to know what Donald Trump's real grievance with Thomas is, other than at the Epstein files, it's that Thomas actually called balls and strikes on the election.
Amazing that that's what constitutes guts these days in the Republican Party, to state the fact that Joe Biden won the 2020 election. So, Congressman Massey, you've been at the center of this effort to get, for a very long time, to get all the information about the Epstein case out into the open. So I guess my question to you is that you have to propose a second piece of legislation here. Why has this been so hard? Why is Todd Blanche? Why was Pam Bondi? Why were they such an obstacle to this thing, which, again, as you know better than most, conservatives, Republicans, MAGA loyalists, podcasters have been talking about for years? This is foundational, that they want to know the truth about who did what in the Epstein case. Why has it been so difficult?
Well, we never anticipated that the chief law enforcement officer of the land wouldn't follow the law. And so Roe and I took some heat because we didn't put in our original bill the ability to sue the chief law enforcement officer of the land. And so that's what the Epstein Files Transparency Act 2.0 does. It gives the victim standing to sue the Attorney General to get their own records, their own testimony in these 302 forms. It also gives congressmen standing to enforce this law, basically to get in front of a judge to say, Judge, here's where they've overly redacted these files. As Roe pointed out, it lets attorneys general, like the one in New Mexico, who's trying to prosecute crimes that happened at Zorro Ranch. Look, Zorro Ranch is as big, expansive, and probably had as many crimes as Epstein Island. And it's right here inside of our own borders, and you've got an attorney general who wants to prosecute crimes where the statute of limitations is not impeding him. Who's impeding him? Actually, the Attorney General of the United States. And then finally, our bill gets at these privileges that the attorneys like Pam Bondi and now Todd Blanche have tried to say keep them from complying with the law, like deliberative privilege, deliberative process privilege. In this Epstein 2.0, we say, no, you can't assert that in order to keep these files secret.
Yeah, I mean, it's still amazing that Todd Blanche will go down and meet with Ghislaine Maxwell, but won't meet with the survivors who are sitting there.
I bet she had a lawyer with her.
But when you put this on Pam Bondi and Todd Blanche, isn't really the issue that this is about Donald Trump not wanting the release of these files? We've seen all of the reporting from Jonathan Swan and Maggie Haberman in Regime Change about how they held meetings in the Situation Room to discuss how to handle this, which is extraordinary in and of itself, that they're not using it to discuss a war, but to discuss the Epstein files. So aren't they just doing the bidding of Donald Trump? And isn't he the one that doesn't want this to come out?
Well, I think he has been trying to protect his friends like Howard Lutnick, who, it's obvious now, he was a bald-faced liar. Just weeks before we got the files released, he was saying he had never had anything to do with Epstein after his first interaction. And now we see he took his kids, his whole family, to the island for lunch. So I think he's still trying to protect some of his friends. And we just need to get it all out there. But more importantly, there are enough names in there. You know, Leslie Wexner, Leon Black, Jess Staley. These are people who are mentioned in there. You're innocent until proven guilty in this country, but there's enough information there that there need to be investigations like there have been across the world. I mean, there's the Prince of England is no longer a prince. The ambassador from Britain to the United States is now gone. The former prime minister of Norway is being investigated. It's happening everywhere except for the United States. And I do think the president's been an impediment. But I agree with the first lady when she says that Epstein did not act alone. And so we need to investigate these things. There need to be prosecutions, not just getting this out there. We've got enough stuff out there now to have the prosecutions. And that's what this 2.0 is about doing. It's letting the state attorneys general do the job that the U.S. attorney general will not do.
Congressman Connor, as we approach the midterm elections, you're going to be losing an ally on this after these elections. Do you think there's going to be more or less impetus to try and get these names out? How confident are you that we're going to see more of these files, and that I think, as you've said, that these men should be going and presented through a perp walk? They should be exposed and named and shamed before the whole country. Do you think that's going to happen? Do you think it's ever going to happen?
I do, because the country is just disgusted by what we have seen. And so we're going to continue to fight, along with Thomas, to get the release of the files and to have prosecutions. But I want to say two things. In losing Thomas, we're not just losing an ally on the Epstein Transparency Act. We're losing the idea that you can be a legislator who votes with your party 80 to 90% of the time and be independent-minded and stand up for integrity. And when the history of the Trump administration is written, they will look to the passage of the Epstein Transparency Act as the first time that Republicans and Democrats stood up to this president and won and dealt a decisive blow, where J.D. Vance is in the Situation Room trying to cover it up. And if you look at when Trump started to lose momentum and had more Republicans challenge him, it was after this act passed. It was largely for the courage of the survivors, but it was also because we had people of integrity like Thomas willing to risk their entire careers to stand up to him.
And if I may clarify something about the 2020 election, what I believe in is the sanctity of the Electoral College. I don't think we should be trying to overturn an election that's been decided by the states. So I said that any state who wants me to deny their electors, I'll do it. But none of the states said that they wanted their electors denied. No governor, no attorney general, no secretary of state, no legislature. And so I said we have to respect the will of the states.
And again, how incredible that
that's hard to say.
Donald Trump is saying that the 2016 election was valid, run when Barack Hussein Obama was president of the United States, and he thinks the 2024 election is valid when Sleepy Joe Biden was running the country. But in 2020, he thinks the president at that point was so incompetent that he couldn't even make sure a fair and free election was run. Who was president in 2020?
Oh, who was that? Might have been.
It's a long time ago.
I'm thinking.
Could be Donald Trump.
Might have been him.
Yeah. Makes no sense.
So why would he think that way?
And again, as Congressman Massey says, you're talking about stolen elections when Republicans won the White House, won the Senate, won Congress, controlled the Supreme Court.
It's a good point.
And yeah, now this is all about, again, when Republicans win, it's legitimate. If Donald Trump loses, it's illegitimate.
Democratic Congressman Ro Khanna of California, Republican Congressman Thomas Massie of Kentucky. Thank you both very much for coming on the show this morning. We appreciate it.